Now, in this, we already got introduced to the Abrikosov vortex state. I gave you an overview of the Abrikosov vortex state in type 2 superconductors. What are the experimental signatures of this Abrikosov vortex state? We saw one experimental signature was a bitter decoration experiment, which is the sprinkling of slightly sophisticated method of sprinkling iron particles on the superconductor and then seeing the location where the iron particles have collected. That gives you an idea whether vortices are present, and it gave you a picture of well-ordered vortex state. We also knew that the spacing between the vortices is inversely proportional to the magnetic field. So by changing the applied magnetic field, you can change the spacing between vortices. For example, at a field of 1 Tesla, your intervortex spacing is about 500 angstroms, or about 50 nanometers. And if you go to a very low field, about 0.004 Tesla, 0.004 Tesla, using this expression, you can estimate that the spacing between vortices becomes of the order of 50 microns. Okay, so they can vary from 50 nanometers to 50 microns, orders of magnitude separation. You can go from very closely spaced vortices which are separated by 50 nanometers to very large spacing between vortices which are of the order of 50 microns. But still, the spacing between vortices, just by changing the magnetic field, but still the spacing between vortices is not of the order of interatomic spacings. They are actually much larger, much larger. This is like 50 nanometers. The spacing at 1 Tesla between two vortices is about 50 nanometers, and of course at much lower fields of 0.004 Tesla it is 500 micron, 50 microns. So you can have very large spacing between vortices. What is the technique which can actually make you see such vortices? Can you use some in diffraction technique? Because you know that even if you have a periodic structure of atoms, you can use X-ray for diffracting from this periodic structure and seeing the diffraction pattern and then making out information about the lattice of these atoms which are present. So can you use something like X-ray, because you have a pattern of vortices, these normal regions which are embedded in the superconductor with a particular order. There are lattice planes associated with it. Can you use X-ray? Now, one reason you cannot use X-rays is, of course, that the X-ray wavelength is much smaller than the spacing between the vortices. Okay, you cannot use the wavelength of your wavelength of X-rays will not match with these 550 micron spacing between vortices. So it's very difficult to see them with X-rays. You will not see any lattice structure or anything which is generated by the this thing. So whatever you need has to have a long wavelength, because the wavelength should be of the order of lambda. Whatever you use for diffracting from these vortices, it has to have a long wavelength. It has to have of the order of a naught. You cannot use X-rays in that sense. Okay, so can you use some charge particles, for example electrons, say a coherent beam of electrons, and diffract it from this lattice? Okay, now using electrons is a problem because the vortices have magnetic flux in them and electrons have a charge. So if you put in a beam of electrons, all the electrons will get deflected by the magnetic field of this thing, and you will see no image. It will cause random scattering of these electrons from each vortex. Okay, and therefore you will get no image which you can get by diffracting these beam of electrons from this lattice. Okay, so you cannot use charged particles. But can you use any uncharged particles? Yes, there are uncharged particles, namely neutrons. Okay, and the advantage of neutron is that it doesn't have any electronic charge. If a neutron does not have any charge associated with it, so you can easily fire a beam of neutrons. And the good thing about neutrons is that they have a magnetic moment. Okay, each neutron has a magnetic moment associated with it. So what happens is that the magnetic moment diffracts or scatters from the vortex because of the interaction of the magnetic moment of the neutron with the vortex. So it is the interaction of magnetic moment of a neutron with the vortex magnetic field which actually scatters a neutron. And so it, because it does not have a charge, there is no effect of the magnetic field on the neutron per se, except that the magnetic moment of the neutron is what is scattering the neutron from the vortex. Okay, so you can send in a beam of slow moving neutrons whose wavelength is large, and the scattering of this beam of slow moving neutrons will give rise to a diffraction pattern, just like you diffract x-rays from a lattice structure and you will see your diffracted intensity Bragg diffraction spots. Similarly, if you diffract your beam of neutrons, you will see a Bragg diffraction spot. And actually people do this experiment with neutrons, where you actually shine a beam of low moving neutrons which is highly collimated, and they are almost very well collimated beam of neutrons which are slow moving, whose wavelength is large. And if you diffract it from a superconductor which has vortices inside it, then you can actually see this Bragg diffraction spot. You will see this hexagonal collection of points which reflects, which says that actually there is a hexagonal arrangement of vortices inside the superconductor. This is actually an experiment at about 3.75 kilovolt. You diffract a beam of neutrons from the superconductor which is applied in a magnetic field of 3.75, and you see this hexagonal arrangement of Bragg diffracted spots, which is generated by diffraction of neutrons, not X-rays. These are diffraction patterns of neutrons. Physics is exactly identical. Instead of X-rays, you just have neutrons, and the neutrons are advantage is that you can make them slow. There are different ways of making them slow. For example, using something called as a velocity selector, you can make the neutrons very slow, and those are called as cold neutron sources. And so you do something called a small angle neutron scattering to actually see the diffraction spots which are generated by neutrons. So this is one example or one experiment that you can do to actually see the vortex lattice. And if you actually see, if you want to see changes in the vortex lattice, you will actually see how these diffraction spots are going to move around as you vary the temperature or magnetic field and so on. Okay, so this gives you an idea of what are the type of experiments you can do to image the vortex state. There are other imaging experiments where, as I said, that if you have a superconductor which is shown here and you have vortex inside it, then on the surface of the vortex, on the surface of the superconductor, wherever the vortex is present, there will be magnetic field which will be generated on the surface. Far away from the vortex, there is zero magnetic field, because of course the magnetic field is screened out and there are no vortices here, so you will have no magnetic field. As you enter into the region of the vortex, you will have strong magnetic field and then no magnetic field and so on. So what you can do is that you can take a Hall probe, because a Hall probe is sensitive to local magnetic field. So if you take this Hall probe which has a Hall sensor out here at the tip of it, and you scan it over the surface of the superconductor, then whenever it is in the vicinity of a vortex, you will get a Hall voltage. And if it is far away from the vicinity of the vortex, there will be no Hall voltage. So if you take this Hall sensor and you put it on a scanner tube and scan it over the surface with nanometer resolution, you can look at the images of the vortices, because wherever the vortex is present, the Hall sensor will experience the magnetic field of the vortices, give a Hall voltage, and so you can make a map of where Hall voltages are appearing on the XY plane. So as a function on the XY plane, you can map wherever you have a Hall voltage signal. So this is your X and Y, and wherever you have a Hall voltage signal, you can color it. At the center of the vortex, there is a strong magnetic field that becomes red, and as you go outside from the core of the vortex, you will see the magnetic field decay out. So the magnetic field is strongest in the center core of the vortex, and it decays as you go to outside on the periphery. Blue is the region where there is no magnetic field, and so you can see that there is a pattern of vortices which are generated. And here of course you see a disordered pattern of vortices. You don't see a very well ordered structure of vortices. This can happen in superconductors, and so this is called a scanning Hall probe microscopy. You can use these scanning Hall sensors to actually identify these exotic whirlpools which are sitting inside the superconductor. And from by measuring the magnetic field distribution around a given vortex, you can also measure the wavelength lambda, the superconducting penetration depth lambda, because by measuring the magnetic field distribution, that distribution is distributed over a distance lambda, so you can do a fitting and you can measure the lambda around a given vortex. Okay, that gives a very sensitive measure of lambda. There are other techniques, namely magneto-optical imaging technique. That is something we do at IIT Kanpur, where you actually come in with a polarized beam of light, and the polarized beam of light undergoes a Faraday rotation wherever there is a local magnetic field present on the sample. So this is like a superconductor where vortices are present, and over the vortices there are magnetic fields which are present, and between two vortices no magnetic field is present. So if you come in with a linearly polarized light, wherever the vortices this local field is present, it will undergo a Faraday rotation, and so you can detect how much is this Faraday rotation and create a map of the magnetic field distribution. So this is actually an image, and where you can see the spots. This is of course not image from our lab, this is another person's lab. This is another from the group of Professor Tom Johansson at in Oslo, where they imaged for the first time using this magneto-optical technique. They imaged individual vortices, where these white spots are actually images of individual vortices, which is actually detected using this technique. People also image vortices using the principle of scanning tunneling microscope. So what is scanning tunneling microscopy? You basically have a very sharp, atomically sharp tip which is moved over the surface of a material, and electrons can hop over a tunneling gap between the tip and the surface. Okay, so if it's a normal metal, of course there are available states on the metal, so the electron can hop from the superconductor, from the tip to the metal which is present below it. And when there is a hopping of this, there is a very small gap between the tip and the surface. Okay, and whenever there is a tunneling of electron, from quantum mechanical tunneling of the electron from the tip to the surface, you will get a current. So by measuring this current, you can actually measure how much is the density of states which are present on the surface. And as you know that in the superconductor, if this material is a superconductor, then around the Fermi energy there is no density of states available, so there should be no tunneling. Okay, so the basic idea is that on one side you have a metal tip, okay, and on the other side you have a superconductor, and there is a gap in the superconductor. There is a zero density of states in this region. Okay, in this region there are zero density of states. Below this it is completely occupied. So if you want an electron to tunnel from the metal to the superconducting side, it cannot do, because these are all filled states. Empty states are only available above the gap. So what you do is that you apply a bias voltage. You apply a bias voltage between the tip and the sample, and by applying a bias between the tip and the sample, you basically change the location of this your Fermi level basically. And then if you can align the top of your conduction of your Fermi level with the superconductor, then electrons will hop from here to here. So basically applying a bias which is sufficient enough for these levels to align, then your occupied states on this end will align with vacant states on the superconductor side, and then you can have an electron which can hop from here to here. So that is the basic idea. So as long as you are over the superconducting region, you will have to apply a finite bias voltage for the electron to tunnel into. But wherever there is a normal region, of course there is no superconducting gap out there, so your bias voltage goes to zero. You can create a tunneling between the tip and the sample whenever the tip is located over a vortex. So through that process, you can actually map out the biasing voltage. So there will be a finite biasing voltage in the superconducting region, but the moment you are over the vortex core, then you don't require that much of a biasing voltage, and your current can actually tunnel into the core of the vortex. And that way you can map out the normal state and the superconducting regions by using this STM tip as you scan it over the surface. And in this way you can see the normal cores. So whereas in the scanning hall technique you actually were able to measure the lambda, by this STM technique you can measure the size of the normal core, because over this red region you do not require any biasing voltage for the current to actually pass through from the metallic tip to the surface. All in the other regions, because it is superconducting, these greenish or bluish regions, it is superconducting, you have to apply a finite bias voltage to establish a tunneling current. Okay, so this way you can actually measure the size of a vortex core. Here you can actually see a very ordered collection of vortices. You can actually see a hexagonal arrangement of these normal cores at about zero point 0.2 Tesla. And as you increase the magnetic field, you will get these vortices come closer and closer to each other, and by measuring the diameter of this, you will get twice of xi. It's not xi, but it is twice of xi. This is the coherence length. Okay, so you can actually estimate the lambda and the penetration depth and the coherence length using these different techniques. So these different techniques gives you interesting ways to actually measure the different properties of the superconductor. By measuring the vortex core, you can, if you measure the amount of flux in the vortex core, you know what is the charge state of the Cooper pairs. Is it 2e or e? You actually know that. Okay, and that's how it was proved that there are Cooper pairs. If you measure the size of this core, you can get an estimate of your coherence length. If you measure the distance over which the magnetic field is distributed, for example in the scanning Hall technique as it was done, you can measure the penetration depth of the superconductor. So the vortex core actually gives you a handle on many aspects of the superconductor. Now we can come to a little bit of application aspects, and here I will be very quick. Maybe towards the end of the course I will have more time to deal with it. That this was all as far as a pure superconductor is concerned. You can also introduce impurities and defects. For example, niobium. Niobium is a good type 2 superconductor, but suppose I introduce atoms of iron inside the superconductor, atoms of copper inside the superconductor. Then what it will do is that it is actually those atoms of iron are non-superconducting, so they will suppress the superconductivity and create normal regions out there. So as you know that you have a vortex which is a normal region and surrounded by a superconducting region, and to create a vortex it costs energy because the free energy of the superconducting state is lower than the free energy of the normal state. So if you want to create a superconductor, you have to supply energy. But when you have impurities and defects which are already sitting inside the superconductor, then it costs no energy to create a normal region out there, because the normal region is automatically created. Its free energy is already higher out there compared to the surrounding superconducting region. So as a result, if you have impurities inside the superconductor which are represented as dots, the normal core actually prefers to pass through regions which are impurities are present, because it costs no energy to create a normal region out there. For any other region in the superconductor, you have to supply this much of energy, hc square by 8 pi, into the diameter of the vortex and multiplied by its length. Okay, area of the vortex multiplied by its length. This is typically the amount of energy cost to create a vortex. This much amount of energy, if you supply to the superconductor, you will create a vortex in this region, and that is typically taken from the magnetic field. But if you have an impurities inside the superconductor, the impurities already are non-superconducting, so there you don't need to supply any energy to destroy superconductivity, and so actually vortices prefer to align with these normal regions or impurities, and they get pinned out there. Okay, it is like a pinning barrier. The vortices actually energetically, they actually prefer to stay in those locations compared to other superconducting regions, because for them to be present in any other region of the superconductor where there is no pinning, it costs energy. It will cost energy to suppress the superconductivity in that region and create a vortex out there. Okay, so there is a free energy barrier, and so the vortex actually gets pinned. It gets stuck in these regions, and this pinning is extremely useful for superconductors. Extremely useful for superconductors. This I will come back to when I discuss about vortices. The idea is that if you take any superconductor and if you apply a current to a superconductor, if you take any superconductor with vortices and if you apply current to a superconductor, then the current actually pushes these vortices, the current into the magnetic flux around the vortex. This is nothing else but the Lorentz force. Okay, and this will generate a force on the vortices which actually starts moving the vortices, and whenever vortices move, you have a normal core which is moving in the superconductor. okay, and this normal core, whatever is this normal core, it is moving and that starts dissipating, okay. You can show that this effect of the Lorentz force, actually, which causes the motion, it generates an electric field, which you know should not be generated in a superconductor because voltage is zero, there is no resistance. But when you have a motion of these vortices, you can show that there is an E cross B, there is going to be a voltage which is generated, electric field which is generated inside the superconductor, and that the electric field is um, being cross the velocity of the vortices, and you can show that that is responsible for causing dissipation inside the superconductor. So whenever vortices move, they cause dissipation inside the superconductor. So any type 2 superconductor has vortices inside it, and if you send any current through the superconductor, then they start creating dissipation because the vortices start moving around, and motion of these vortices creates dissipation or resistance. So whereas you want to have superconductors with zero resistance, in type 2 superconductors, because you have vortices, and when you apply current, they apply a Lorentz force and they start moving the vortices, there are these normal cores which are starting to move, and there is a dissipation inside the system that is responsible for creating dissipation inside the superconductor. And that is not good for applications because again you start getting dissipation. You want superconductors to have no dissipation so that you can send current without any power, because power has to overcome the dissipation. But if you have superconductors which again have dissipation because of motion of vortices, that's not good. So you want to pin vortices, you want to prevent them from moving. How do you pin vortices? You pin vortices by actually creating more disorder sites inside the superconductor, which are going to pin these vortices and prevent them from moving. And so this is where introducing disorder in the superconductor and pinning vortices and preventing them from moving around is very, very important if you want to apply vortices, if you want to apply superconductors. Because any superconductor you send a current, if it has vortices inside it, they will move if it is no pinning inside it. If you keep pinning inside it, they will pin vortices, they will prevent them from moving and again make dissipation zero inside the superconductor. So role of disorder is also very important, and it gives rise to very rich physics. It destroys, of course, the vortex lattice. The Abrikosov vortex lattice is destroyed because of pinning, but there are a whole plethora, there is a whole variety of um, um, physics which is associated with when you introduce spinning, and how does it affect the vortex state. It's a whole big and very big area of research, okay, where lots of results are there. It's not possible to cover those results in this course. I just wanted to give you a flavor that how disorder and impurities are also useful. In fact, for superconductors they become very useful because they pin a vortex and prevent it from moving, and thereby make the system dissipationless, the superconductor dissipationless. And superconductors find various applications. For example, superconductors are used for making very large magnets, the MRI magnets, in which you are pushed into this magnet bore. These are actually 9 Tesla magnets which are made by superconducting wires which are wound, okay, and this entire system is cooled by liquid helium, okay, and you are actually put inside this magnet, and the magnetic field is used to actually do your MRI imaging. All the imaging which is done is with these magnetic field applied, and then there are RF pulses and so on which are applied to actually study the magnetic resonance, do magnetic resonance, and pick up the signal, and do the imaging of your brain and all the other organs whose MRI you want to get done. So the wires which are used inside this are superconducting wires. They are type 2 wires, type 2 superconducting wires, which have a lot of pinning inside them, so that you can send in large currents, okay, without any dissipation. In these superconducting wires, there are large currents you can send inside them without creating dissipation. So these materials have very large pinning inside them. As you can see that in these superconductors, if you measure the voltage as a function of current, you will find that the voltage in these superconductors will be zero up to a finite value of current. After that, the vortices start moving. Below that, vortices are pinned, they cannot move, so there is no dissipation. There is no voltage that you need to send in the current. Only above this point, your vortices start moving and they start dissipating, and finite voltage appears. Okay, so this is a measure of how strongly pinned your vortice is. It is a critical current, and larger the critical current, the more useful is the superconductor for such applications. So you actually use high critical current superconductors for application where you actually have to control the disorder in such a way that you can increase the critical current of the superconductor. Namely, the R is equal to 0 value, the range of current up to which you can maintain large currents without creating any dissipation. Namely, when you put in large currents, it is easy to understand that when you put in large currents, there will be large Lorentz force on vortices and they will start moving. But if you create sufficient pinning, then these vortices, even at these large currents, will remain pinned, will not move, they will remain trapped, and so no dissipation will be available. So the whole game is to get higher and higher critical current. How can you disorder the superconductor that it can remain superconducting and at the same time increase the critical current? From application point of view, this is very important. Similar magnets are used in particle accelerators at CERN, for bending your charged particles inside the CERN accelerator at CERN, LHC. You need such superconducting magnets which large bores, and these wires carry few hundreds to 500 amps of currents to actually generate such large magnetic fields over such large bore diameters. And there are a whole lot of applications that you have for transmission of power, switching of devices, electric generators, energy storage devices, and so on, which use these superconductors because energy can be stored in them without any dissipation. You can set up a current inside a superconductor and the current will permanently stay there as long as the superconductor is cold. And when you want to take out that energy, so there is magnetic energy which is stored inside that system, and when you want to again retake out that energy, you can actually get that energy out of the system, and you can use it for MRI and various other applications. So that actually gives you an overview of different applications, and there is one very important application which is used something called as Josephson devices of superconductors, and that will be something I will be discussing in my subsequent lectures. So this is a very important aspect of superconductivity, which has numerous and very, very important modern day applications, which is the Josephson effect of superconductors. And that is something I will discuss in my subsequent lectures.